Welcome to the TokyoBill Weekly. Stories from Japan, told from Japan. This week, why Japan is fining people for littering in a city that removed all the bins, and who is actually to blame. A few months ago, I was heading to the station from a favorite watering hole of mine in Tokyo when a man running in my direction threw a glass bottle at a building wall. Not dropped it, not left it somewhere. Threw it, hard, so that it shattered against the wall and sent glass across the pavement. He and his companion, both non-Japanese, seemed to be having a pretty good time, laughing as they were. I challenged him on his action. The exchange was unpleasant, and I won't pretend I handled it with particular grace. But I wasn't prepared to let it go, or say nothing. Then, just last night, outside a convenience store, I watched a man fling a still-lit cigarette butt into the street. His girlfriend, also smoking, and other companions were gathered in front of the store, cans of beer and chuhai in hand. I picked a cigarette up and dropped it at his feet, and pointed out, with an expression of unveiled displeasure, that he had left something behind. He was stunned, and he was clearly furious, and the couple glared at me the entire time I waited for the pedestrian light to change. Thankfully, he didn't approach me, but I'd do it again. I mention these two moments not to cast myself as some kind of one-man neighborhood watch, but because they illustrate something I suspect anyone living in Tokyo right now would recognize. There is a friction building between the city that Japan presents to the world and the behavior of some of the people the world is now sending here in record numbers. It is a friction that residents feel, whether Japanese or foreign. When you live somewhere, you develop a relationship with it. You don't want people coming into your home and treating it like a garbage dump. Japan, it turns out, agrees, and it is starting to do something about it. On June 1st of this year, Shibuya Ward introduced on-the-spot fines for littering. Patrol officers now monitor the ward and collect a 2,000 yen fine, around $12 on the spot from anyone caught throwing away trash improperly. Cashless payment is accepted, including credit cards and QR code services. A detail that tells you something about who the ward has in mind. The slogan for the campaign, printed in English as well as Japanese, is about as direct as public messaging gets. If you throw trash, you lose cash. The fine applies across all of Shibuya Ward, not just around the famous Scramble Crossing and Hachiko Plaza, but through Harajuku, Ebisu, and Yoyogi as well. Businesses selling takeout food and drink are now also required to provide trash bins on their premises, with fines of up to 50,000 yen for non-compliance. On the first day of enforcement, 10 fines were issued. The immediate narrative around all of this, in international media especially, has been straightforward. Japan is cracking down on tourist littering. Record visitor numbers, record mess, proportionate response. Japan welcomed approximately 42.7 million international visitors in 2025, the highest annual figure ever recorded. That framing is not wrong, but it is, as tends to be the case with these things, incomplete. Takeout containers make up around 75% of all litter recorded in the Shibuya area. Of that, convenience stores account for about 63%, cafes around 12%. The litter problem is structurally a takeout food problem, and takeout food is consumed by everyone in Shibuya, locals and visitors alike. The ward's own data indicates that it is mostly people who do not live in Shibuya who are responsible for the littering, which is a rather different statement than saying it is mostly foreign tourists. Commuters passing through, domestic day trippers, nightlife crowds from across the city, these are as much of the picture as anyone arriving from overseas. This matters because the story of littering in Shibuya is being told, in much of the international press, as a story about tourism doing damage to Japan. And tourism is doing damage to Japan, in various ways, in various places. But the litter issue is more complicated than that framing allows. Blaming the foreign visitor is satisfying and simple. The actual data is messier. To understand why the situation has reached this point, you need a small piece of history that surprises almost every visitor to Japan for the first time. There are almost no public trash bins in Japan. Not in the streets, not in most train stations, not in parks. If you buy a drink from a vending machine on a Tokyo street corner and finish it, you are expected to carry the empty bottle with you until you find a designated disposal point, which may be some distance away, or may effectively be your hotel room. The most direct reason traces back to March 20th, 1995, the morning the Aum Shinrikyo cult released sarin gas into the Tokyo subway system during the rush hour. One of the nerve gas canisters used in the attack was concealed inside a public trash can. In the aftermath, bins were removed from train stations and public spaces as a security measure. That decision, made in the immediate shock of one of the worst domestic terrorist attacks in Japanese history, quietly became permanent policy. But the bin removal only partially explains the current landscape. The deeper reason is cultural, and it predates 1995 by generations. In Japanese society, the expectation is that you are responsible for your own trash. People carry wrappers, bottles, and food packaging in their bags until they reach home or a suitable disposal point. This is not experienced as an imposition, it is simply part of how public space is understood. The clean streets that tourists photograph and marvel at were not produced by an army of cleaners working invisibly behind the scenes. They were produced by millions of people who had internalized from childhood a norm that says your trash is your problem until you can deal with it properly. That system worked remarkably well for decades. What it was not designed for was 42 million annual tourists, a takeout food culture that has exploded since the pandemic, and streets like those around Shibuya Station that function, particularly late at night, less like residential neighborhoods and more like open-air entertainment venues with no infrastructure to match. A Japan Tourism Agency survey found that the lack of public trash cans was the single biggest problem reported by foreign visitors in 2024, cited by nearly 22% of respondents. Around 70% said they had carried their trash until returning to their accommodation. That is, in its way, a remarkable statistic. The majority of foreign visitors to Japan are doing what they are supposed to: carrying their trash, looking for somewhere to put it, and in many cases taking it back to the hotel. They are, imperfectly but genuinely, trying to follow the norm. A minority or not, and it is that minority, layered on top of the domestic, non-resident crowd, that produces the visible problem in Shibuya's streets each morning. Shibuya Ward's response is revealing in what it chooses to do, and what it deliberately does not do. The ward is not adding public trash bins. The city's position is that businesses generating takeout waste should be responsible for providing disposal facilities, not the local government. It is a philosophically consistent position. Responsibility sits with whoever generates the need. The convenience store sells the drink. The convenience store provides the bin. The customer uses it. The street stays clean. Whether that philosophy scales to the volume of people moving through Shibuya on a Friday night is a different question. The cleaning crews who work the area each morning, removing the previous night's accumulation before the city wakes up, have described a cycle that simply repeats regardless of the rules. The trash appears, it is removed, it appears again. A 2,000 yen fine issued to 10 people on the first day of enforcement is a signal. It is not yet a solution. I think about the man chucking the cigarette butt from last night, and I try to be fair to people generally, up to a point. He may have come from a place where you drop a cigarette in the street and someone employed to clean streets picks it up. That may be a reasonable expectation in many places. It is not the expectation here. And that gap, between the habits people arrive with and the norms the city runs on is exactly what the fine is trying to close. Whether a 2,000 yen penalty changes behavior in the moment is uncertain. Whether it changes the habit that produced the behavior is more doubtful still. What it does, unambiguously, is communicate that the city has noticed that the tolerance is ending and that the cleanliness of these streets is not an accidental feature of the landscape. It is something that has to be actively maintained, and that maintenance has a cost which is now, formally, being passed on. Japan's cleanliness is real, and it is one of those things that makes living here genuinely pleasant. Walking through most of this city, most of the time, the streets are in a condition that would be remarkable in almost any comparable metropolis in the world. That is worth protecting. The question is whether protecting it now requires the same approach that created it, or something new, designed for a city that looks considerably different than it did 30 years ago. I don't have a clean answer to that, but I know which side of the argument I was standing on last night, waiting for the lights to change. That's the Tokyo Bill Weekly for June 13th, 2026. I've been, and remain, Tokyo Bill. Thank you for listening, and take care.